Okay, this is English 373, week 14, part 8. So in this, I just want to kind of say goodbye to Shakespeare by reading a short story about Shakespeare. Again, I would like to be able to show it to you. It's this long, but I can't show it to you because the camera's it's not happy. It reverses things like a mirror, so you can't see it. I don't know how to fix it right now, and it's almost the end of the semester, and I can't do any more technology shit. I'm tired of technology breaking on me all the time. But I am going to read this story. It's by Borges, B-O-R-G-E-S. If you're going to get one book by him, you want a book called Ficciones. F-I-C-C-I-O-N-E-S? I don't know. Anyway, it's great. Borges. He's a short story writer, writes these really trippy, crazy short stories about fictional realities that crash into our world. His best story is one called Plan Ukbar Orbis Tertius. He has another one called The Library of Babel. It's just crazy. He writes these crazy stories. One of them is about a fictional world that somebody invents, and the fictional world starts invading our world. And the other one is about a library that contains an infinite number of books, and each book contains it's an infinite number of books and that are made of random sentences or random arrangements of letters. So that means somewhere in the library is the true story of how you die. And somewhere in the library is, you know what I mean, like anything is in there because letters rearrange infinitely, so they can say, so everything is said somewhere in this library, but it's so big you'll never find the book you're looking for. That's kind of neat. So Borges writes this story called Everything and Nothing. And it's about Shakespeare. Now, there's kind of a twist at the end of the story where he's like, aha, it's Shakespeare, but I'm going to tell you that it's Shakespeare from the beginning. Because you took this class, you probably figured it out pretty quickly. It starts off with some biographical details about Shakespeare and then goes crazy. So I'm just going to read this, and then I'm going to tell you the meaning of life, and then we're done for the semester. Okay, away we go. Everything and Nothing. There was no one inside him. Behind his face, which even in the bad paintings of the time resembles no other, and his words, which were multitudinous and of a fantastical and agitated turn, there was no more than a slight chill, a dream someone had failed to dream. At first he thought that everyone was like him, but the surprise and bewilderment of an acquaintance to whom he began to describe that hollowness showed him his error, and also let him know forever after that an individual ought not to differ from its species. He thought at one point that books might hold some remedy for his condition, and so he learned the little Latin and less Greek that a contemporary would later mention. Then he reflected that what he was looking for might be found in the performance of an elemental ritual of humanity. Let's talk about sex. And so he allowed himself to be initiated by Anne Hathaway, his wife, one long evening in June. At 20-something, he went off to London. Instinctively, he had already trained himself to the habit of feigning, pretending, that he was somebody, so that his nobodiness might not be discovered. In London, he found the calling he had been predestined to. He became an actor, a person who stands upon a stage and plays at being another person for an audience of people who play at taking him for that person. I think that's one of the most interesting sentences I've ever read. An actor is a person who stands on a stage and pretends to be another person for an audience of people who pretend to take him for that person. So that means that, right, you think of the actor who is, what does the actor do? He pretends. But you, the audience, are also pretending because you're pretending the actor is the character. So he's pretending and you're also pretending. Interesting. The work of the thespian, that's an actor, held out a remarkable happiness to him, the first perhaps he'd ever known. But when the last line was delivered and the last dead man applauded off stage, the hated taste of unreality would assail him. He would cease being Ferrex or Tamerlane, characters he was playing, and return to being nobody. Haunted, hounded, he began imagining other heroes, other tragic fables. Thus, while his body, in whorehouses and taverns around London, lived its life as a body, the soul that lived inside it would be Caesar, who ignores the admonition of the Sibyl, and Juliet, who hates the lark, and Macbeth, who speaks on the moor with the witches who are also the Fates, the three weird sisters. No one was as many men as that man whose repertoire, like that of the Egyptian Proteus, was all the appearances of being. From time to time, he would leave a confession in one corner or another of the work, certain that it would not be deciphered. Richard says that inside himself he plays the part of many, and Iago says, with curious words, I am not what I am. That's quoting from the Shakespeare plays. The fundamental identity of living, dreaming, and performing inspired him to famous passages. One of those is the tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow speech that you know. For 20 years, he inhabited that guided and directed hallucination, but one morning he was so overwhelmed with the surfeit and horror of being so many kings that die by the sword and so many unrequited lovers who come together, separate, and melodiously expire. That very day, he decided to sell his theater. Within a week, he had returned to his birthplace, where he recovered the trees and the river of his childhood and did not associate them with those others, fabled with mythological allusion and Latin words that his muse had celebrated. He had to be somebody. He became a retired businessman who'd made a fortune and had an interest in loans, lawsuits, and petty usury. It was in that role that he dictated the arid last will and testament that we know today, from which he deliberately banished every trace of sentiment or literature. Friends from London would visit him in his retreat, and he would once again play the role of the poet for him. History adds that before or after he died, he discovered himself standing before God, who said to him, History adds that before or after he died, he discovered himself standing before God, and said to him, I, who have been so many men in vain, wish to be one, to be myself. God's voice answered him out of a whirlwind. I, too, am not I. I dreamed the world as you, Shakespeare, dreamed your own work. And among the forms of my dream are you, who, like me, are many, and yet no one. I think about that story like every day. I think it's great. I think it's the best thing I've ever read about Shakespeare. I love it. I'm not going to say anything about it. I don't want to do a whole thing about it. I think we've reached the end of the semester, and you can decide whether you think that's interesting or not. But I like the idea that Shakespeare becomes all of these characters because inside he's nobody. And that he meets God in the end and says, hey, I'd like to be somebody now. And God says, I'm just like you. I'm nobody. And that's why I created everything. And that just like God created the world, Shakespeare created all of these plays. And just like God filled the world with all different kinds of people, Shakespeare filled all of his plays with all these different kinds of people, because they were both on some level lonely, and both because they were on some level they weren't anybody, and so they needed company. It's a very interesting idea. I don't know. I think about it a lot. Okay, one more video. I'll tell you the meaning of life, and then you can all go home. I'm sure you're wondering what the meaning of life is, and you're going to find out. See you in the next video. And final video. We're almost done.